It started with a panic attack. Not his, hers. The woman lying on the couch across from him was in her late 20s. She had a steady job and no history of trauma, at least not the kind she could remember. But she'd come to him with symptoms that were spiraling out of control. Anxiety, nightmares, phobias so intense that just walking past the swimming pool sent her into a cold sweat. Nothing in her conscious memory explained it, and nothing in her medical file helped. For Dr. Brian Weiss, it should have been a standard case. He'd handled hundreds like it before. At the time, he was head of psychiatry at Mount Sinai Medical Center in Miami. A Harvard-educated, Yale-trained psychiatrist. Highly respected and deeply rational. The kind of man who trusted case studies, not crystals, brain chemistry, not reincarnation. And he didn't believe in past lives. But that patient, the one with the panic attacks, was about to shatter everything he thought he knew. Before we get into the story, I'm Devin, and this is Porch Lore. Please be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel and help me reach 1,000 subscribers. Enjoy the story. This is Porch Lore. And I'm your host, Devin. This is the tale of many lives, many masters. Her name was Catherine, and she wasn't looking for anything spiritual. She was just trying to survive. Dr. Weiss started with conventional therapy, talk therapy, medication, and then even hypnosis, a technique often used to access suppressed childhood memories. If something had happened to Catherine as a child, she might have buried it. Hypnosis could bring it to the surface. And it did. Only not in the way Dr. Weiss had expected. One afternoon, deep in a relaxed trance, Catherine began describing a scene that didn't match anything in her known life. She spoke of a small village, a stone house, and clothing that didn't belong to the 20th century. She said her name wasn't Catherine, it was Rhonda. She was living in 1863, somewhere in Greece, and she described a death, violent, terrifying, and unforgettable. Dr. Weiss sat back in stunned silence. At first, he assumed it was fantasy, a metaphor, maybe a delusion. But Catherine wasn't delusional. Outside of these sessions, she was articulate, intelligent, and grounded. Still, Dr. Weiss was cautious. He didn't want to encourage hallucinations. But the next session, it happened again. And then again. Each time he guided her into a hypnotic state, Catherine went deeper. She described dozens of lives. Male, female, rich, poor, ancient, modern. Sometimes she died in childbirth. Other times in war. Once, she drowned in a flood. But the pattern was clear. In each life, trauma carried over. Phobias, fears, patterns of suffering, all of it followed her from one incarnation to the next. And something else was happening too. In the space between lives, the moments after death and before rebirth, Catherine would channel what she called the Masters, who described a realm of light, peace, and teachers. The Masters were not teachers like we know them, but beings of knowledge, entities that communicated messages, guidance, warnings, and information. But the messages from the Masters weren't about Catherine. They began to include specific details about Dr. Weiss, his father, his infant son, and personal facts that no one knew, not even Catherine. And when one of these details turned out to be true, something Dr. Weiss had told no one, he couldn't explain it. This was the moment his life changed. The Harvard psychiatrist, the respected scientist, the rational skeptic was being confronted with evidence he couldn't dismiss. He tried. He really did. But the evidence kept piling up. Not just from Catherine, but from the changes he saw in her. Her phobias, disappearing. Her anxiety, replaced by calm. Nightmares, gone. Something about having the chance to relive these lives was healing her in ways nothing else had. And that's when he made a decision. He had to dig deeper. Even if it meant risking his reputation, even if it meant confronting a truth that went far beyond psychiatry. Dr. Brian Weiss was about to cross a line, and there was no going back. What do you do when your patient starts channeling voices that don't belong to her? Not dramatic movie-style possession, no spinning heads, no demonic snarling, just stillness, calm, and a voice that seemed to come from nowhere. At first, Dr. Weiss didn't know what to call them. He referred to them as the voices. But Catherine had a name for them. She called them the masters. According to her, these masters didn't belong to any one lifetime. They weren't past lives, they were something else entirely. Entities who existed in the space between lifetimes. Guides, watchers, maybe even guardians. And they had messages. Not just for Catherine, but for Dr. Weiss and for all of us. These messages were never vague or symbolic. They were surprisingly specific. During one session, a master revealed a piece of information about Dr. Weiss's father. Something long buried in the psychiatrist's memory. A secret, a trauma. Something Catherine couldn't possibly have known. That was the turning point. Because now, this wasn't just a case study. It was personal. Dr. Weiss recorded every session, taking notes, trying to apply logic and structure to what felt like a slow unraveling of everything he'd ever believed. And here's the thing. He wasn't some fringe New Age therapist looking for validation. He was a doctor, a scientist. For years, he'd taught students that the brain was the source of all human experience. Consciousness, memory, emotion, all just chemistry and neurons. But now, in this quiet office in Miami, he was watching something else unfold. Catherine wasn't just describing past lives, she was moving through them. Each session uncovered another piece of long, tangled soul journey, one life at a time. And the traumas from those past lives, they matched her current fears. The fear of water, it went back to a life where she drowned in a flood. Her fear of choking traced to a lifetime where she died from a throat illness in ancient Egypt. Her anxiety around men, rooted in a life where she'd been assaulted in 18th century France. Dr. Weiss didn't coach her. In fact, he was careful not to feed her any ideas at all. He'd simply guide her into a trance and let her speak. And every time, her descriptions were vivid, consistent, and historically accurate in ways that surprised even him. He started researching the details she mentioned. The architecture, the clothing, the terminology. She didn't get it from movies. There were no books about this stuff in her house. And she wasn't spiritual. She didn't even believe in reincarnation. And yet somehow, she knew things that she had no way of knowing. That's when the masters returned. During these sessions, Catherine would slip into a stillness. Her tone would change. Her face would relax. And she'd begin delivering messages, not from a past life, but from somewhere else. The masters spoke of karma, of life lessons, of soul groups, people who reincarnate together, lifetime after lifetime, to help each other grow. Sometimes as friends, sometimes as family, and sometimes even as enemies, but always connected in each life. They spoke of the purpose of suffering, not as a punishment, but as a teacher. And they explained that time as we experience it doesn't really exist on their level. Past, present, future, it's all happening at once. To Dr. Weiss, these ideas sounded outrageous. Philosophical, maybe, but not clinical. Still, he couldn't ignore the impact on Catherine. Session after session, she was transforming. The phobias were gone. She became more confident, more joyful. It was as if understanding her soul's journey had unknotted a lifetime of anxiety. And this wasn't just healing. It was transformation. Dr. Weiss had seen therapy help people before, but never like this. The masters also gave him advice on treating patients, on dealing with grief, and on the purpose of his own life. And while he was skeptical at first, many of their insights began to play out in real time. Synchronicities started happening. Events that lined up too perfectly. Messages that echoed in his dreams. And even other patients began spontaneously recalling past lives under hypnosis without being prompted. Dr. Weiss found himself standing on a threshold. On one side was everything he'd been trained to believe. On the other, a door that was opening into something vast, mysterious, and terrifyingly beautiful. He realized he had two choices. Keep this hidden forever, bury the tapes, call it a strange case and move on. Or share what he'd found with the world and risk everything. He knew what his colleagues would say, that he'd lost his objectivity, that he was delusional, that he'd gone woo-woo. But what if he was right? What if reincarnation wasn't just possible, but real? And what if all of us, every fear, every trauma, every strange sense of déjà vu, wasn't random at all? What if it was a memory? Not of this life, but of many lives and many masters. By now, Dr. Weiss had recorded over a year's worth of sessions with Catherine, dozens of past lives, dozens of messages from the masters, each one building on the last, connecting across time. Privately, he was fascinated, but professionally, he was stuck. He was still the head of psychiatry at Mount Sinai Medical Center in Miami. He still lectured, still published peer-reviewed articles, still wore the white coat. And now he had a secret. Because let's face it, if you're a Harvard-trained psychiatrist and you tell your peers that you're doing reincarnation therapy, your career is over. So, for a while, he kept it quiet. Just a strange private chapter in an otherwise very normal practice. But then, something shifted. He started using regression therapy for a few other patients. Carefully, quietly. And what he found shocked him. It wasn't just Catherine. Other patients, people with no belief in reincarnation, began slipping into what sounded like past life memories. They didn't come to be hypnotized for this. They were just looking for help with anxiety, depression, or phobias. But during deep relaxation, they started speaking about lifetimes they didn't remember living, in detail. A firefighter in 1920 Chicago. A mother during the Irish famine. A soldier during the Crusades. And more importantly, these recollections helped. When a patient uncovered the moment of trauma from another lifetime, their symptoms in this life started to fade. They weren't cured instantly, but something inside them shifted, as if bringing the memory into the open allowed the soul to finally breathe. Dr. Weiss kept recording. He took careful notes, he cross-referenced historical details, and over time, he saw a pattern emerge. There were themes of unfinished business, lessons not learned, relationships that kept repeating in different lifetimes. One patient might face abandonment over and over again until they finally understood what they were meant to heal. Another might live countless lives struggling with control until they finally let go. These weren't random memories. They were stories with arcs, patterns of growth. Eventually, the evidence overwhelmed the fear, and Dr. Weiss decided to publish a book. Not as a sensational expose, not to make money, but because he knew other therapists might encounter the same thing, and they would need a guide. The book was called Many Lives, Many Masters. It told the story of Catherine, her phobias, her past lives, the masters, everything. And just as he feared, the academic world panicked. Colleagues immediately distanced themselves. Reviewers mocked him. Some called it pseudoscience. Others accused him of exploiting a vulnerable patient. But the public, they were ready. Word spread quickly. The book didn't just resonate, it exploded. People who'd never heard of reincarnation were suddenly questioning their dreams, their fears, their sense of déjà vu. Therapists started experimenting with regression therapy. Spiritual groups across the world adopted Weiss's terminology. And Catherine's journey became a cultural touchstone for people searching for deeper meaning. Over time, thanks to Dr. Brian Weiss, the stigma around reincarnation and past life regression has softened. Dr. Weiss went on to publish multiple books on the subject. He's appeared on television, he's given lectures, and not just to spiritual groups, but to psychologists, psychiatrists, and major medical conferences. His ideas were still controversial, but he was no longer alone in believing them. Because here's the thing. Whether or not you believe in reincarnation, the results were real. People healed. And that made even the skeptics pause. If past life therapy was helping people release trauma, did it really matter if the memories were literal past lives or just powerful metaphors? For Dr. Weiss, the answer was simple. If it heals, it matters. He wasn't asking people to abandon science. He wasn't pushing religion. He was offering a lens, a new way of understanding the soul. One that didn't begin at birth and didn't end at death. And here's what makes his story different from so many spiritual figures. He never asked anyone to believe him blindly. He invited people to try it, to explore, to question, and above all, to stay curious. Because in the end, the real question wasn't, is reincarnation real? The real question was, what would you do differently if you knew your soul never died? Once Many Lives, Many Masters became a bestseller, the genie was out of the bottle. Dr. Weiss had done something most scientists wouldn't dare. He merged clinical practice with metaphysical experience and brought reincarnation into mainstream psychological discourse. But the story doesn't end with Catherine, because in the decades that followed, Dr. Weiss continued working with thousands of patients, and the more he explored, the more consistent the patterns became. Patients who'd never heard of regression therapy would spontaneously access what sounded like past lives under hypnosis, languages they didn't consciously know, events they couldn't have studied, memories that felt more like experiences than imagination, and always the therapeutic breakthroughs. Now here's where things get even stranger. Some patients started recognizing each other. During public regression sessions or workshops, complete strangers would recall lives in which they knew one another, sometimes even describing the same scene from opposite perspectives. One woman might recall being a Civil War nurse. Another would remember being her wounded patient, describing the same field hospital, the same muddy uniform, even the same scar. These weren't just emotional releases. These were synchronized recollections, like puzzle pieces snapping back into place. Dr. Weiss came to believe that many of us reincarnate in soul groups, clusters of interconnected spirits who play different roles in each life. In one lifetime, your daughter might have been your mother. Your spouse might have been your sibling. Your best friend might have been your greatest enemy. And according to Weiss, the purpose of these role reversals is growth. Each incarnation gives us a chance to experience new perspectives. to resolve old karmic wounds, and to evolve together. He emphasized that the soul isn't born perfect. It learns. It falls. It repeats. But it always moves forward. And reincarnation isn't punishment. It's curriculum. Now, some people might say, well, this all sounds lovely, but where's the proof? And that's a fair question. Dr. Weiss never claimed to have hard proof, but he did offer evidence in the form of consistency, transformation, and healing. He documented patterns across thousands of sessions. A woman with crippling arthritis recalled being shackled as a prisoner in a medieval dungeon. After the session, her pain diminished significantly. A man, terrified of drowning, remembered dying on a sinking ship in the 1700s. After facing the memory, he overcame his phobia of water. A child born with a rare birthmark described a previous life where he'd been shot in the exact same spot. And here's the part that still gives people chills. Some of those past life details matched real historical events. The patients had no way of knowing names, places, and causes of death. Now, skeptics will argue this could be cryptomnesia, forgotten memories from books or movies. And in some cases, that might be true. But others, they're harder to explain away. Which brings us to the deeper question. Even if these past life memories aren't literal, why do they heal people? Why would the symbol of drowning resolve a real phobia? Why would the story of dying in childbirth relieve a woman's unexplained infertility anxiety? Maybe our unconscious mind speaks through stories. Maybe the soul doesn't care if the past life was historically accurate. Maybe it just needs the narrative to make sense of the pain. But if even one of these regressions is true, if even one person really remembered a previous incarnation, that changes everything. It means consciousness survives death. It means karma isn't just a mystical concept, it's a spiritual law. And it means we're not walking alone. We're walking in the footsteps of our own past and paving the road for future versions of ourselves. Dr. Weiss's work helped people grieve less, fear death less, and love deeper. Because once you believe your soul has lived before and will live again, the stakes of this life shift. You become more forgiving, more curious, less afraid of endings, and more focused on the lessons you're here to learn. In the years since publishing Many Lives and Many Masters, Dr. Weiss has trained thousands of therapists in past life regression techniques. He's written several more books, and he's helped usher in an entire movement of spiritual psychology, blending clinical insight with soul-based healing. To this day, people across the world credit his work with saving their lives, not through pills, not through diagnosis, but through stories. Stories buried deep in the soul, waiting to be remembered. So what do we make of all this? Is reincarnation real? Are past lives literal? Or is this all a metaphor? A therapeutic fiction that helps us make sense of emotional pain? Maybe we'll never know for sure. But what is clear is that something powerful happens when people revisit the past, even if it's a past they don't consciously remember. Whether it's healing trauma, breaking cycles, or just understanding themselves better, past life regression has helped people all over the world. And Dr. Weiss, he took a risk that changed his life, and maybe ours too. He started out a man of science, but he ended up a messenger of the soul. And his work leaves us with a question. If you've lived before, what are you here to do now? Because if the soul never dies, and the lessons keep coming, then maybe this life is just one chapter in a much, much bigger story. And maybe the best way to understand where you're going is to remember where you've already been. I'm Devin, and thanks for joining me, Porch Pals. For more videos like this, please subscribe to my YouTube and help me reach 1,000 subscribers.